Welcome back to Smart Talks.
Yeah,
We love diving deep into those intriguing books you've always meant to read and, extracting the golden nuggets of knowledge just for you.
absolutely.
And today we're going exploring the world of personal finance and behavioral economics with The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel.
Housel brings such a unique blend of storytelling and insightful analysis to this complex topic.
Yeah.
He's a partner at the Collaborative Fund
Right.
and has written for renowned publications like The Motley Fool and The Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, his background definitely gives him like a really interesting, broad perspective on how people interact with money.
Right.
One of the stories that really struck me was about Ronald Reed,
Oh, yeah.
a janitor who amassed an $8 million fortune.
Yeah.
It's a story that really challenges our assumptions about wealth and success.
It's a prime example of how understanding the psychology of money rather than just focusing on investment strategies can make a profound difference.
So let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Housel starts by suggesting that we all have a bit of crazy when it comes to money.
Mm-hmm.
He points out that people buy lottery tickets when they can't even afford an emergency fund.
I think what he's getting at is that what might seem irrational on the surface often stems from deeply personal experiences and ingrained beliefs about risk-reward and what constitutes financial normalcy.
So our financial decisions are often driven by emotions and personal narratives rather than pure logic.
Precisely.
Okay.
There's a fascinating study that found people's lifetime investment decisions are heavily influenced by the economic climate they experienced early in adulthood.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
If you came of age during a period of high inflation, you might be more risk-averse later in life, even if the economic environment has changed completely.
It's called anchoring bias.
Okay.
And it's just one example of how our past experiences can shape our financial behaviors in ways we might not even realize.
It makes you wonder how much of what we consider financial success is due to skill versus just being in the right place at the right time.
Housel uses the contrasting stories of Bill Gates and his childhood friend Ken Evans to illustrate this point.
Oh, interesting.
Gates's access to a computer in high school, a rarity back then, played a pivotal role in his success.
Wow.
Evans, equally brilliant, died tragically in a mountaineering accident, highlighting the unpredictable nature of risk.
It's a sobering reminder that we don't always have as much control over our outcomes as we'd like to think.
And it makes judging financial success, whether our own or someone else's, a lot more nuanced and complex.
Another point that really resonated with me was the power of compounding.
Yeah.
Housel uses the example of Warren Buffett, noting that the vast majority of his wealth was accumulated after his 50th birthday.
It's a powerful illustration of the long game.
Right.
If Buffett had started investing later and retired earlier, his net worth would be a tiny fraction of what it is today.
So it's more about consistency and patience than trying to get rich quick.
Absolutely. The longer you allow your investments to grow, the more powerful the effect of compounding becomes.
It's like a snowball rolling down a hill. It starts small, but as it gathers momentum, it becomes an unstoppable force.
And that's why it's so crucial to start investing early and resist the urge to constantly chase the next hot stock or investment scheme.
But isn't it true that some people have much higher annual returns than Buffett?
Yes, but their overall wealth might be significantly less if they started investing later in life.
Okay.
Take Jim Simons, for instance, a hedge fund manager with an impressive track record.
So even though his annual returns are higher, his overall wealth is less because he had less time for compounding to work its magic.
Exactly. It highlights a key principle. Time is your greatest asset when it comes to investing.
That's an interesting perspective. It really challenges the way we typically think about success in the financial world.
It's a reminder that achieving long-term financial well-being is less about hitting home runs and more about consistently hitting singles and doubles over an extended period.
That brings up another important point from the book, the idea that keeping money is just as crucial as making it.
Housel contrasts the story of Jesse Livermore, a speculator who made and lost fortunes multiple times, with the more steady approach of John Bogle, founder of Vanguard, who championed index funds, and emphasized the importance of having enough over chasing ever-increasing wealth.
So it's not just about reaching the top of the mountain, but also learning how to stay there.
Precisely. Housel calls this the survival mindset for building wealth. It's about prioritizing resilience over chasing short-term gains.
That makes sense. But what does it mean to be financially resilient in a practical sense?
It involves building a strong financial foundation that can withstand unexpected shocks, such as job loss or a market downturn.
So things like having an emergency fund, diversifying your investments, and avoiding excessive debt.
Exactly. It's about creating a buffer zone that allows you to weather the inevitable storms without derailing your long-term financial goals.
That reminds me of another key concept from the book, the idea of embracing room for error.
It's about acknowledging that we don't have perfect foresight and that life rarely goes according to plan.
So we need to build flexibility into our financial plans and be prepared to adjust course when necessary.
Yes, it's about accepting that we'll make mistakes and encountering unexpected events and building in a cushion to absorb those shocks without getting completely derailed.
It sounds like it's about finding a balance between planning for the future and accepting that we can't predict everything that's going to happen.
Absolutely. The more rigid our plans are, the more fragile our financial lives become.
It's a reminder that humility and adaptability are just as important as financial knowledge and investment skills.
And that leads us to another fascinating concept. Housel explores the idea of being reasonable rather than always striving for perfect rationality when it comes to money.
That's an intriguing concept. What does it mean to be reasonable with money?
Well, sometimes the most logical choice on paper might not be the best choice for our emotional well-being or our ability to stick with a plan over the long term.
Can you give me an example of what that looks like in practice?
Think about it this way. Sometimes the most logical choice on paper might not be the best choice for our emotional well-being or our ability to stick with a plan over the long term.
Can you give me an example of what that looks like in practice?
Housel tells the story of Julius Wagner-Jauregg, a doctor who won a Nobel Prize for treating syphilis with malaria.
Malaria. That doesn't sound very safe.
It wasn't. But back then, syphilis was often fatal and there was no known cure. Wagner-Jauregg observed that some patients who also contracted malaria seemed to recover from syphilis after experiencing high fevers.
So he intentionally infected his patients with malaria. That's a bold move.
It was a risky approach, but it worked for some patients. The point is that it wasn't the most scientifically sound or ethical approach, but it was a reasonable solution in a desperate situation.
I see where you're going with this. So how does this apply to financial decisions?
Sometimes it's better to make a reasonable choice that we can live with and stick to, even if it's not perfectly optimized from a purely financial perspective.
So it's about finding a balance between what's technically correct and what's emotionally sustainable.
Exactly. It might mean choosing investments that you feel good about and can stomach during a downturn, even if they don't have the absolute highest potential return on paper.
Or maybe it's about prioritizing a sense of financial security over chasing the highest possible returns.
That's a great example. Housel emphasizes minimizing future regret, even if it means sacrificing some potential gains.
So it's about making choices that align with our values and our emotional well-being, even if they don't perfectly align with the principles of traditional finance.
That's the essence of it. It's about recognizing that we're humans, not robots, and that emotions play a huge role in our financial decision-making.
This is all making me rethink my own approach to money. I've definitely made some choices in the past that seemed rational at the time but didn't feel quite right on a gut level.
That's a common experience, and I think Housel's point is that it's okay to acknowledge those feelings and to make choices that align with our overall sense of well-being.
It's a reminder that personal finance is deeply personal, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
It really is. There's no magic formula or foolproof strategy. It's about finding what works best for you, your individual circumstances, and your emotional makeup.
Speaking of emotional makeup, I'm curious about what Housel has to say about the role of history in financial decision-making. It seems like we're always looking to the past for guidance, but he cautions against relying too heavily on historical trends.
He does. He uses the example of a Russian professor who in 2008 boldly predicted the United States would break apart.
Oh, wow.
It highlights the danger of extrapolating historical trends without considering how things might change.
It's a good reminder that the future doesn't always resemble the past.
Exactly. We tend to underestimate the possibility of unforeseen events, especially in a field like finance, where innovation and unpredictable human behavior play such significant roles.
So how do we even begin to plan for a future that's full of unknowns?
Housel argues that understanding the power of narratives is crucial. He uses a thought experiment where an alien observer is trying to understand the 2008 financial crisis simply by analyzing changes in the economy.
So the alien is looking at things like unemployment numbers, GDP growth, and housing starts.
Right. But the alien completely misses the crucial role that shifting narratives and sentiment played in causing and exacerbating the crisis.
It's the stories we tell ourselves about the economy and the markets that can have the most profound impact on our decisions, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Remember back in 2007, the prevailing narrative was housing prices will keep going up forever.
Right.
Then in 2008, it flipped to the world is ending, sell everything.
And those shifts in narratives can happen so quickly.
They can, and they can have a ripple effect throughout the entire financial system. Think about how much of the stock market is driven by emotion and psychology rather than pure logic.
It's like when everyone starts panicking and selling, it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, even if the underlying fundamentals of the economy are still relatively strong.
It's a classic example of how narratives and emotions can influence market behavior. Housel argues that we often fall into the trap of historians as prophets, placing too much faith in past data to predict future outcomes in a field where innovation and disruption are constant.
It's tempting to think, well, the market has always recovered from crashes, so this time will be no different. But that kind of thinking can be dangerous, can it?
It can be. Housel points out that structural changes in the economy make direct comparisons to the past problematic. For example, the rise of 401ks and the decline in the frequency of recessions have fundamentally altered the economic landscape.
It's like the game itself has changed, so the old playbook might not work anymore.
Precisely. Even Benjamin Graham, considered the father of value investing, acknowledged the limitations of relying too heavily on historical data. He abandoned many of his stock-picking strategies later in life because, as he put it, the situation has changed a great deal since then.
So even the greats have to adapt and evolve their thinking as the world changes.
Adaptability is key in the world of finance. We can't get stuck in our old ways of thinking. We need to be open to new information, new ideas, and new possibilities.
So if we can't rely solely on history as a guide, how do we navigate this complex and ever-changing financial landscape?
Housel emphasizes the importance of embracing room for error. We have to accept that we'll make mistakes, encounter unexpected events, and need a cushion to absorb those shocks.
We touched on that earlier, the idea of having a margin of safety built into our financial lives.
It's a fundamental principle that's worth emphasizing repeatedly. Whether it's our investment strategy, savings goals, or career choices, we need to build in flexibility and resilience to adapt to whatever life throws our way.
It's like driving on a winding mountain road at night. You don't want to be hugging the edge of the cliff. You want a little bit of space between you and disaster, just in case something unexpected happens.
That's a great analogy. The unexpected is always lurking around the corner, especially in the realm of money.
This is all giving me a lot to think about. It's prompting me to reflect on my own financial journey and how I can incorporate some of these principles into my own decision-making.
That's fantastic. I think one of the most valuable aspects of exploring the psychology of money is that it helps us understand not just the what of finance, but the why behind our behaviors.
It's not just about crunching numbers. It's about understanding the deeper motivations and emotions that drive our financial choices.
And sometimes those emotions lead us to make decisions that aren't in our best interest. That's why Housel stresses the importance of developing self-awareness when it comes to money.
So we need to be mindful of our own biases, fears, and aspirations.
Exactly. We need to ask ourselves tough questions. Are we clinging to outdated narratives? Are we being swayed by fear or greed? Are we making choices that align with our values and long-term goals?
Those are some pretty thought-provoking questions.
They are, and they can be uncomfortable to confront. But I think the more we understand our own psychological relationship with money, the better equipped we'll be to make sound financial decisions.
This conversation is really shifting my perspective. I'm starting to see the world of money in a whole new light.
That's what's so fascinating about this topic. It challenges our assumptions and compels us to think differently about how we manage our finances.
So we've talked about the role of narratives, the importance of room for error, the need for adaptability, and the significance of self-awareness. What else does Housel have to say about navigating this complex world of money?
Well, he gets quite personal in this next section. He talks about his own approach to saving and investing, which he frames around the goal of financial independence.
I'm always interested in hearing how other people manage their money, especially those who've spent a lot of time thinking about it.
Housel is very transparent about his approach. He emphasizes the importance of living below your means, even as your income rises, so you can maintain a high savings rate.
It's that classic advice, pay yourself first. But it's so much easier said than done in a culture that often glorifies consumption.
It is. But Housel makes a compelling argument for its importance. He highlights the sense of freedom and security that comes from having a healthy nest egg and the ability to make choices that aren't dictated by financial constraints.
It's like you're not just saving money, you're buying yourself options and flexibility for the future.
That's a great way to put it. Financial independence isn't just about having a lot of money, it's about having the freedom to choose how you want to live your life.
That resonates with me. I've always valued flexibility and the ability to pursue my passions without being solely driven by financial considerations.
I think that's a sentiment many people share. Housel also discusses his preference for index funds as a way to participate in the market without getting caught up in the risky and often futile game of trying to pick individual stocks.
I'm a fan of index funds myself. It's a simple, low-cost way to diversify your investments and capture the long-term growth of the market.
It is, and statistically speaking, it's a sound strategy. Of course, other approaches exist, and what works for one person may not work for another. But Housel's point is that you don't need to be a Wall Street wizard to build wealth,
You just need a solid plan, a long-term perspective, and the discipline to stick with it.
and the willingness to adapt and adjust as needed. The world of money is constantly changing, and we have to be willing to evolve our thinking along with it.
This is all giving me so much to think about. I'm inspired to take a closer look at my own finances and see how I can apply some of these principles.
That's fantastic. I think that's one of the most valuable outcomes of exploring the psychology of money. It prompts us to reflect on our own financial habits and make more conscious, deliberate choices.
Well, I know we've covered a lot of ground, but there's one more area I want to touch on before we wrap up.
Yeah.
Housel takes us on a whirlwind tour of the evolution of the American consumer, and it's an eye-opening journey.
It is. It provides a historical context for understanding our current relationship with money and the challenges we face as a society.
So let's take a trip back in time. Housel breaks it down into 4 key periods, kind of like a play.
I like that analogy. Each act represents a distinct phase in the evolution of the American consumer, with its own set of economic forces, social norms, and psychological underpinnings.
Act 1 is the post-World War II boom. Everyone's ecstatic, the war is over, but there's this big question mark hanging in the air. What happens now?
Right. You have millions of GIs returning home, needing jobs, and the economy has to transition from wartime production back to a peacetime footing.
But it turns out America had a secret weapon: productivity.
We had become incredibly efficient at manufacturing goods, thanks in part to the technological advancements that happened during the war.
And not only could we make things, but we had this pent-up demand for all the stuff we couldn't buy during the war years.
After years of rationing, saving, and making do with less, people had money burning holes in their pockets and were eager to spend it.
It was like a nationwide shopping spree. Everyone wanted new cars, new homes, new appliances, symbols of a brighter future.
And that consumer spending created a virtuous cycle. It fueled job growth, leading to more spending, and the economy took off.
It's fascinating how this collective shift in psychology, from wartime austerity to peacetime abundance, played such a pivotal role in the economic boom.
Absolutely. And as Housel points out, this period was marked by a greater sense of equality, both in terms of income and wealth, as well as lifestyle expectations.
You mean the idea that everyone was in it together, working towards a shared prosperity?
Exactly. That sense of shared purpose contributed to the economic boom and created a climate of optimism and opportunity.
It wasn't just about material possessions. It was about the belief that everyone had a chance to participate in the American dream.
That's a crucial point. But then, as with all booms, there's often a bust act.
Yeah.
Two rolls around. The 1970s malaise.
Ah, the 70s disco bell-bottoms and economic turmoil.
Unfortunately, yes. A confluence of factors, spiking inflation, global competition heating up, and the oil crisis created a sense of uncertainty and unease that contrasted sharply with the optimism of the post-war years.
So the party was over.
Not exactly, but the music changed. And what's interesting is that this is when the baby boomer generation came of age. They had different expectations and experiences than the greatest generation that came before them.
They hadn't lived through the Depression or the war, so their views on money, risk, and success were probably very different.
They were. This generational shift coincided with some fundamental changes in the economy. The shared prosperity of the post-war years began to fade, and income inequality started to rise.
So that brings us to Act 3, the rise of inequality. What happened here?
The economy continued to grow, but the gains were increasingly concentrated at the top. The gap between the rich and everyone else started to widen.
Is this where the keeping up with the Joneses phenomena really kicks into high gear?
It is. You have this small group of people doing incredibly well, buying bigger houses, fancier cars, taking more lavish vacations. Everyone else is watching, feeling like they need to keep up even if their incomes aren't growing at the same pace.
It's that aspirational lifestyle thing we see so much of today. We're constantly bombarded with images of wealth and success, which makes it easy to get caught up in trying to achieve a certain standard of living, even if it's not financially sustainable.
That's exactly what happened. People began stretching themselves financially, taking on more debt to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't truly afford.
It's a recipe for disaster, isn't it?
It can be. It's a pattern that has played out repeatedly throughout history. When people sense a widening gap between their aspirations and their reality, they reach for things that promise to close that gap, even if those things are ultimately unsustainable.
So that brings us to Act 4, the era of "this isn't working." What characterizes this period?
This is where we see a growing sense of disillusionment and frustration, especially among those who feel like the system is rigged against them. They're working hard, but they're not getting ahead, and they're starting to question the rules of the game.
It's that feeling of no matter how much I try, I can't seem to catch a break.
That's a perfect way to put it. This sense of discontent is fueled by a number of factors: rising inequality, stagnant wages, increasing costs of education and healthcare, and a growing sense that the deck is stacked in favor of the wealthy.
It paints a rather bleak picture of the current state of affairs.
It does. But as Heller reminds us throughout the book, economics is a story of cycles. Things change, trends shift, and new solutions emerge. He does point out some positive trends like declining unemployment, rising wages for lower-income workers, and slower growth in college costs.
So maybe there's hope for a more equitable and sustainable future.
I believe there's always hope. But as Housel emphasizes, expectations often lag behind reality. Even if things start to improve, those feelings of frustration and distrust might linger.
It makes sense. Narratives take time to shift, and we're still living in the shadow of the events of the past few decades.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the core message of the book. Understanding the psychology of money, how our emotions, biases, and experiences shape our financial decisions is crucial if we want to break free from these destructive cycles.
It's not just about numbers. It's about the stories we tell ourselves about money, about risk, about success, about what's possible.
Becoming aware of those stories, questioning our assumptions, and being willing to adapt our thinking is the first step towards making smarter and more fulfilling financial choices.
It's like we're looking at a mirror reflecting our own financial anxieties and aspirations.
It is. And it's a reminder that we're not just individuals making isolated financial decisions.
Right.
We're part of a larger economic and social system that shapes our choices and opportunities.
It makes you realize that personal finance is deeply intertwined with broader societal trends.
Absolutely. Our individual financial behaviors both influence and are influenced by the economic forces at play.
This has been an incredible deep dive.
Yeah, it
I
has.
feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of myself, my relationship with money, and the forces that shape our financial life.
Me too. It's a book that stays with you long after you finish reading it.
If you're intrigued by what we've discussed today, I highly recommend picking up a copy of The Psychology of Money. It's full of insightful stories and thought-provoking ideas that will challenge the way you think about money.
And it's not just about theory.
Right.
Housel offers practical wisdom and actionable advice that you can apply to your own financial journey.
Whether you're just starting out or you're a seasoned investor, there's something in this book for everyone.
Definitely.
It's a reminder that financial success isn't just about having a high IQ or mastering complex investment strategies.
Right.
It's about understanding the psychology of money, developing self-awareness, and making choices that align with our values and long-term goals.
It's about recognizing the role of luck and risk, embracing the power of compounding, and prioritizing resilience and adaptability.
And it's about remembering that personal finance is deeply personal.
There's no one-size-fits-all approach. What works for one person may not work for another. The key is to find what works best for you, your individual circumstances, and your emotional makeup.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today and given our listeners plenty to ponder.
I hope so. It's a conversation that could easily continue for hours.
If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the psychology of money, be sure to like and share this episode so others can discover it as well.
And if you're new to Smart Talks, we encourage you to subscribe so you'll be notified about our next deep dive into another great book.
We're always on the lookout for books that spark curiosity, challenge conventional thinking, and offer practical insights that you can apply to your own life.
So until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those smart conversations going.
And remember, the best investment you can make is in yourself. Happy learning.